and they're off. Here we go.
Do you know what's cool? Further Faster, the best independently owned outdoor store in the known universe. Whether you're heading out on climbing, paddling, tramping or running adventures, look no further than Further Faster for all your gear and expertise needs over the summer, especially with the big races coming up. Head over to 57A Buchan Street, Sydenham, Otutahi, Christchurch, or hit them up at furtherfaster.co.nz. And Andrew McDowell, could you please play the jingle now? It goes something like, further faster, there in Christchurch. Rocky is hairy and so is Badger. Jules is nice and Jacob is delicious. Go to further faster now.
Oh, further faster, there in Christchurch. Rocky is hairy and so is Badger. Jules is nice and Jacob is delicious.
Go to further faster now.
Dirt Church Radio.
Episode 309 of Dirt Church Radio. I'm Matt Raymond.
And I'm Ellie Pottinger.
Hey mate, we haven't done, this is the first time since the new format, which was last year, that we've actually done this, me and you, because you've always been away travelling. So it's always been Andrew and I, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Have you had, this is the first Dirt Church Radio episode of 2025, and did you have a good break? Or was it even a break?
It's not really a break, but it's been nice, just like kind of a bit more just not work. Well, no, still work. I don't know. Time with family is always lovely. Yeah. And I've had a couple of cool days, like been to Mount Maunganui for a swim at the beach and to Tiki Tapu a couple of times, which has been great. What about you?
Well, I mean, coming into the new year, I had a injury scare, so I had that
accessory
frantic text message contact with you, like, actually I think my leg's broken, can't ignore this being sore anymore, and thought I had a stress fracture. Got the moon boot on Christmas Eve or the 23rd, and Merry Christmas, and thought I was done and dusted, but turns out it's either sort of a bursitis thing or something going on, but there's no fracture, there's no arthritis, there's no anything, so it's just there's no stress reaction, so just managing my foot, and whilst that's put a little bit of a change in the training, still fully committed to February, and nice to have a couple of days off. So we just both Rebecca and I worked through Christmas Day. In fact, I worked Christmas Boxing Day, and we just headed out we had like 5 days in total off. It was rad. Lots of doing sweet bombs and water holes, swimming in the sea. Went for a mean run the other day on the Te Araroa Trail up through Matakana, out to Pakari, and it was over Omaha, and it was excellent. So yeah, here we are, ready to. I'm ready to go. I'm really ready to go.
How did it feel actually? Like, thinking, like all this work towards Tarawera might be over. Like, how were you about it all?
Do you know, I was pretty good in that I was like, well, I'll just defer it. I'm not going to do anything stupid, and I'm not going to run through it. And if I've got like a moon boot on, there's nothing I can actually do.
No.
I could have changed my Instagram handle to the Moon Boot Runner and just been like, just done it with a moon boot, which is stupid. But, it was just one of those things. And it was Christmas. I was exhausted, and actually a little bit of me was, I wouldn't say relieved, but I was like, okay, well, at least I've gone down swinging. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'll just defer it till next year. And I have to say, I'm glad that it wasn't. And, I was out for 8 hours on Saturday, and that was really cool, and it held up really well. I mean, it's it is what it is, but it's not. I'm just glad it wasn't like a break or a reaction. So that's super good. But
not a game ender.
Not a game ender. No, definitely potentially a game alterer, and we'll just have to see what happens. But I guess when everything else, I'm hopeful when everything else is sore, the intermittent soreness that arises won't be as sore if everything else is sore. So we'll see what fights for primacy.
I love it, the experiments we do on ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of experiments, we should probably crack on with this.
Yeah.
It's the greatest run ever. It's the greatest run ever.
Greatest Run Ever, brought to you by Squadron. Don't know if you've ever heard of them, Ali. Give their 4-week special coaching trial a go, and you can find the link on the website, which is dirtchurchradio.com. This is the part of the show where we ask you to write into us and tell us about your greatest run ever. It doesn't have to be a race or a mountain summit. It might just be a run around the block. Something that sung to you for some reason, send them in to us at dirtchurchradio@gmail.com. And this is from Jess Garner. Now, traditionally, we don't read the greatest runs out. I don't prepare anything, but I will split stuff into paragraphs. And my God, this one is gnarly with a capital G. So hi there, Dirt Church. Long-time listener, first-time emailer. It took me so long to send in a greatest run ever because I was waiting for the one that everyone talks about, the run that breaks you down to your core and shows you what you're made of. And for me, that run was the beast that is the GPT Miler, the Grampians Peaks Trail Race in Halls Gap, Australia. The year was 2024 and the weather was a balmy 37 degrees. Let that sink in. The sun hotter than Hades. The race started at midday at Mount Zero at the base of the impressive Taipan Wall, a massive sandstone rock face favoured by rock climbers worldwide, which should have given us a good indication of what was to come. But as they say, denial is not just a river in Egypt. The plan to run 100 miles, banking 7,700 metres of elevation along the way. So that's, 22,000 feet in the old money? The training to date had been good. I'd run some pretty impressive long runs, hills and terrain in the lead up. What I failed to do, however, was hike a lot, which is what I would proceed to spend most of the next 25 hours of my life doing until the race gods decided to take pity and cancel the race due to the concerning number of runners succumbing to heat stroke. By that stage, I'd just cracked 100 Ks, I'd forgotten my why, swore I was never running again, cursing 100-mile races, trying to find a soft rock to nap on, spoiler alert, soft rocks don't exist, singing to a stick because I was lonely and there was no one around, and wishing I had asked the race directors before the race started what other dangerous animals were out there after seeing 2 scorpions and a large black snake. The race was the absolute gnarliest I'd ever been in. The aid stations were an absolute train wreck of trail runners scattered around on any plastic lawn chair or shady patch of dirt they could find, some twisting and writhing like they were auditioning for the contortionist role in Cirque du Soleil. Holy wah. One poor gentleman was in mid-full-body spasm and proceeded to projectile vomit across the path I'd seconds before traversed. Further down the trail, I ran past another gent lying in the sun, and when asked, "What are you doing, mate?" he reported he was just trying to cool off. As night hit, we continued to battle the heat and humidity, whereupon I found a charming chap lying in the bush, gazing up at the stars, happily munching on a pack of Smith's crisps. Upon asking if he was okay, he replied, "Leave me here, I'm happy." Which sounds pretty Captain Oates to me, right? Like I'm just going outside, gentlemen, maybe sometime. But she says, spoiler alert, I ran into him the next day and he was fine and indeed very chuffed with himself. The race may sound like it was furthest from a greatest run ever, being more hike than run due to the technicality of the trail and resulting in me moving the slowest I've ever moved in a race or in life in general for that matter. It challenged me mentally, physically, emotionally. I had to contemplate being out there for 10 hours over my estimated finish time, and when I felt like there was absolutely nothing left in the tank, my plan A, B and C had blown up in my face. I was so exhausted it felt almost impossible to put one foot in front of the other. But I got to that moment, the moment where you think, why am I doing this? And have no answer, but you don't give up. You try. You give yourself the chance to be more than what you are, to finish what you start and to be better than you were the day before. You stop. You take time to enjoy it and appreciate the incredible landscape you're running through. You take all the pictures, truly embrace the moment, make connections with fellow runners, and finally remember, this is why we run. We don't have to, we get to. Looking back, I don't know if I would have finished it if it hadn't been cancelled, but I know nothing in me felt like or wanted to continue multiple times during this amazing adventure. But I wasn't going to give up. They have a saying for this race, that it's a race like no other, and by gosh, is it a race like no other. Swore when I finished I'd never go back, so as we all know, I'll be seeing you next year, Grampians Peak Trail. What an incredible greatest run ever.
Wow.
Let's start.
It had everything there.
Yeah. Let's start as we mean to continue. Send them in, folks. We are getting a few more trickling in, but the stocks are still a bit lean. But my goodness, thanks, Jess. That was That was incredible. And I mean, we'd heard about the GPT and the gnarliness of
Yeah.
it, but oof. That's
I didn't realise it was scorpions.
that's the thing with Australia, it's the gift that keeps on giving. They're like, make a spider, make it with armour, stick a sting on it, make it poisonous. Cool. Put them everywhere. Sweet. Yeah. Wow. So, look, Ali, you did the interview this week. Recorded it last year. Tell us, who have we got on Dirt Church Radio?
So this week's interview is with Erin Colebatch, who is an accomplished ultra runner in her own right, and she's also a sports dietitian. And I just thought, what a great opportunity to talk to someone who really gets it. Like they've lived all of this as well as kind of understand the science and the theories behind things too. So it was a great chat. Lots of practical kind of take homes. I'll be keen to hear your thoughts, Matt. There's a few that might help out for the miler.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Nutrition is something that it's so tied up with. I wish I was one of those people who food was just fuel, but it's not as tied up as many of us are. It's tied up emotionally. It's tied up, it's got history with it. And certainly, some of those takeaways. I guess the thing that I always don't do is eat enough.
Oh.
So that's a thing that you have to think about, that sort of heroics and hunger. But look, let's not give too much away. Let's crack into this interview with the amazing Erin Colebatch.
Welcome to Dirt Church Radio. I am Ali Pottinger, and I'm very excited to be chatting today with Erin Colebatch. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Ali. Thank you very much for having me.
Erin is an Adelaide-based runner and a sports dietitian. Erin, what's your relationship like with running? When did you get into it, and what experiences and achievements have you had through the years?
Yeah, it's a big question. My history of running.
I know.
Look, I've been a runner for a long time now. Traditionally, like at high school, I did netball and rowing, but there was always an element of running as part of that training, and that was always probably the bit that I think I did the best in. When I left school, I went through a little bit of a party phase for a few years and then realised this wasn't really sustainable and started going to the gym to just sort of get a bit of fitness and feel a bit better about myself, and then running very quickly came from there. And just started off, going out for a half-hour jog in my lunch break from the cafe or whatever and that sort of thing. And then, just sort of over time, the runs got longer and longer. I didn't really know any other runners at the time, and people were sort of questioning and saying, what are you doing, like going out for all this time running and we don't see you? And it's just a bit strange because they were still back in that party phase, and, they wanted to stay out all night and I wanted to get up first thing in the morning. And it was, I think, one day I went for a run and, it was down along the beach, and I was out for ages, and this was before people had GPS watches and stuff like that. And I came back from the run and I was like, how long have I actually been running for? And I got the street directory out of my car and I had a little look and I plotted it, and I'd done 16 Ks. I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. Maybe I should try and do a marathon. I signed up to do Sydney Marathon. And I can't even remember what plan I had for training, but I must have done something in particular. I didn't know anyone that was going. I didn't have any friends that were doing it, but I went along from Adelaide and, I went over there and loved it. It was an amazing experience. Sydney's a super cool place to do a marathon. I tried my first gel halfway through. Don't recommend. As a sports dietitian, don't ever do that, anybody.
But you weren't a sports dietitian then?
I wasn't, no. I did pretty well, all considering, and got back and the end of the race and just went, okay, that's it. I've got to go and find some other people that like to run now. Like, can't keep doing this by myself. So, from there I joined a South Australian-based running group where we used to train together on Tuesday nights and do our speed work and stuff together, and started to develop some really wonderful friends out of that community. We were sort of all training towards marathons at that stage, but it didn't take long before I met other people that were like, oh, have you heard about this thing called ultramarathon? And I was like, what's that? And then went from there. So in terms of my experiences and achievements, it's hard to say. Like, there's been so many events, but it's not necessarily just about those. I would say that, the best thing that's come out of it is just all the connections I've made. And I think everybody in the scene would probably agree, that's probably similar for them as well.
Yeah.
But just, being able to have something to challenge me in a different way. There's lots of aspects of training for an event that correlate with performing well in life generally.
True.
So event-wise, I've done a lot of things across Australia, New Zealand, from sort of, your half marathon distance up to 100K. And some of my best ones, I love Surf Coast Century. I love Tarawera, UTA. It's awesome. And all the big marathons really, like just a whole another experience. So just, incredible with that many people in the atmosphere. So, lots of great stuff really.
Pretty cool races. And coming from Adelaide, how good's the running there?
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I live in the Adelaide Hills and I think this is the best place to run in Adelaide. So for people not familiar with Adelaide, it's, sort of in the middle of Australia down the bottom. We've got a sort of Mediterranean style climate. So at the moment it's like stupid hot. It's about 40 degrees yesterday here. But in winter it gets really cold, especially where I live. It can, some weeks not get above 10 degrees. This Adelaide Hills are maybe, 20 minutes, half an hour drive from the main part of the city. So that's really convenient for a lot of us because, to be able to get into the trails for many people in other places, it's just hours and hours of driving. So super lucky. We've got some beautiful national parks here that we can run through and quite varied terrain that you can get some really steep stuff and also some flatter stuff. It's generally pretty dry, as you'd expect in the driest state, in the driest continent. But you can also get down to the coast and do coastal runs really easily too, because the coast is just 20 minutes the other side of town. So you kind of got everything really. We don't get any kind of like crazy mountain running like you guys get over in New Zealand. I'd love to do some of that, but it's some really good variety. It's a nice place to be. Yep.
Yeah. I've with people that I've coached before, they've talked about running and having dolphins kind of jumping alongside them and stuff like that. So it does sound like a great place for a run.
Yeah, definitely.
So you're a sports dietitian. So can you talk us through like what's the difference between a nutritionist, a dietitian and a sports dietitian?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a really important question, I think, for people to have a bit of an understanding of because people get pretty confused. And actually, to be honest, I had to go and look and think, what's going to be the best definition to answer this with? Just to make sure I'm being clear with everybody and, making sure I support everyone in understanding. So all dietitians are nutritionists, so we get that dual qualification of dietitian and nutritionist. But a nutritionist who doesn't have a dietetics qualification can't call themselves a dietitian. So for me to become a dietitian, it required me to go to university and have a particular degree that I studied, which is a dietetics degree, which has got strict kind of guidelines that it has to follow to be accredited as a dietetic course in Australia. We've got specific standards that we're expected to adhere to when we become an accredited practicing dietitian, which is, part of Dietitians Australia's accreditation system, which enables us to be able to allow our clients to claim for Medicare and private health cover and things when they use us as a service. Nutritionists aren't regulated in Australia. Essentially anyone could call themselves a nutritionist. There are a million different courses out there that, claim to support people in becoming a nutritionist. The degree of which they go to in the detail and the knowledge and ability to support people to make practical changes up, would be very variable, I would say. And I guess the other thing is a dietitian is really qualified in also medical nutrition therapy. So if someone's, coming to me as a runner, but they've also got cancer, for example, or they've got diabetes or something like that, we can kind of work with any condition and support them in that medical model as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I didn't even think about those sort of considerations. That would keep you on your toes, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it does. So you get some interesting cases of people coming to you with multiple things that you have to kind of start to prioritize, because sometimes, there's a guideline for this and a guideline for that. But then when you've got this plus that, plus that, plus that, plus that, it's like, oh, what do I do now? So, yeah, it's can be interesting, particularly in the hospital setting. You'd get a lot of that. But, even in my running dietetics, I get that too sometimes.
Yeah.
As a sports dietitian, so a little bit different to a accredited dietitian on its own. So a sports dietitian does some extra study. It's actually just a short course that we would do just to upskill in sport nutrition knowledge and skills. And then you go away and you practice, but you'd also have a period of time where you've got some mentoring or professional development sort of requirements going on in the background just to support you as you're kind of stepping into that role.
And was that kind of the goal from the get-go when you studied dietetics? Were you like, right, I'm really interested in sports dietitian work? Or was it like, what got you into it?
Yeah, it wasn't the goal.
Yeah.
I first got into dietetics because I just liked being healthy.
Yeah.
Then when I went through the course, we were very much, the courses are very tailored towards hospital-based careers. So that was kind of a lot of our goals from the other people that I studied with, all wanting to get those big hospital jobs. I got one of those and worked in that setting for a really long time. My interest personally was really around, critical care, oncology, quite, not amazingly like warm, positive stuff, but really interesting. And the sport dietetics really came quite a lot later. And it was funny because I was running for a lot of that time, or pretty much all of that time while I was doing that part of my career. But for some reason, I never really kind of put the two together until I sort of was starting to do those really big distances and had a few issues with injuries and things and went, okay, what's going on here? Maybe I need to actually look at this a bit better than I have. And also, I think I'd been in the hospital setting for a while and needed a bit of a new challenge. And, it was just starting to get a little bit overwhelmed by the sort of, the environment of working with sick people all the time.
Yeah.
The sport nutrition was really only something that I've been working on a lot for the last 6 years. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What would you say are key things runners should get right when they're aiming to fuel their runs?
So much. To keep it simple, I always think a really good place to start is to look at what are your requirements before, during, after exercise. So just in that sort of peri-exercise period, I guess. That time is a really important time where we do have really specific guidelines on quantities and types of nutrients you should be aiming to consume. Something that I think people will sometimes do is like they might think, oh, but I'm not hungry for that, so I'm not going to have that.
Yeah.
But it is a time where we sort of need to put that aside a little bit and go, well, my body actually needs, this fuel to be able to perform and do the work.
Yeah.
It's not, my body's not going to know that you're just going to go for a run. You've just decided to do that. So you've got to put that in there and kind of override the appetite centre a little bit. That fuel that is the most important thing to think about at that time is carbohydrate. So I always have the carbohydrate conversation with my clients in that first session about, what is it? Why do we need it? How much do we need? It's a really important source of fuel, particularly at higher intensity exercise, but we do also use some at lower intensity as well. And we store it as glycogen in our muscles and liver, and that then becomes available as carbohydrate when we run. It's broken down to glucose, and we use it to fuel the muscles. Really just understanding, what are those amounts of carbohydrate that we should be consuming at those different times, and the different types of things they can use to meet the guidelines. So people often don't realise how much or little some foods actually provide in the way of carbohydrate. I have people say, oh, I had a piece of toast and then I went and ran for 4 hours. Oh, you've heard that, Ali.
I'm from probably done it myself, to be honest. You just get going, right? And then you're like, oh, I'm still out here. Oh, why am I feeling so tired?
Yeah. So it's that's really far too little carbs before a 4-hour run. Challenging people a little bit and then getting them comfortable with it as well. A lot of people get a bit nervous about increasing intake that much.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because we've kind of had this culture of, like, oh, don't eat too much or don't eat this or don't eat that. And I can imagine you kind of are dealing with a bit of paranoia about what people are putting in or letting themselves eat that.
Yeah, absolutely. The sugar concerns,
Yeah.
I shouldn't be eating sugar. It's not healthy. But then it's like, but you're eating gels and sports drinks and lollies like all the time when you're running, and you need that fuel because it's quick acting like performance fuel that gives you that energy when you need it.
Yeah.
Don't go and eat that for the whole rest of the day. But it does challenge people a lot. I just always encourage people, like, it's an experiment, give it a go, see how it feels. I'm generally going to be seeing my clients again. So
Yeah.
we'll work through any concerns and issues as they arise. That's a really good place to start. And look, there's, I'm not a big advocate for like researching yourself on the internet because sometimes it can be a minefield, but we do have pretty good guidelines available about like requirements before, during and after sport in terms of carbohydrate that are pretty accessible by the general public. You can jump on the Sports Dietitian Australia website, the Australian Institute of Sport, for example. Stuff like that. You can get some pretty good information.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. When I've been through there before, it's pretty straightforward to access, which is good. What have been some of the strangest fueling strategies that you've heard of?
Oh, one that I was a little bit like had to keep my straight face about was avocado paste in a soft flask.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
a bit odd.
It's probably quite fatty.
Yeah, I imagine like the moistness would be good because a lot of people like that. But yeah, it was an interesting one. Did kind of wean off that.
Yeah.
I think some of the multi-day stage runners, they do start to get into some of those high-fat foods and things, which can be necessary to meet their calorie requirements when they're going for that long. Some of them are a bit odd, like strips of bacon and things like that.
I have heard of that before. I wonder if part of it's actually just that, kind of trying to avoid flavour fatigue and having those different tastes or kind of savoury requirements met rather than thinking about it from actually a fueling perspective.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. Fatty, salty foods often when you've been going for a long time can be a bit more appealing. So, it does make sense in that regard for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to go through some hypothetical but relatable scenarios, I'm sure. Number one, or should it be number two? If someone left for their run and they'd frequently get 10 minutes into their run and need to poop, what would you suggest they trial? Is it dietary? I mean, it could be pelvic floor related too, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts from a kind of dietetics perspective.
Yeah, it's such a common issue. I find it particularly with my females. I've been someone that can be prone to that myself. It's super frustrating. Don't be embarrassed. If anyone out there is, everyone else is probably doing it too.
Yeah. I'm sure we've all done a jungle poo, right?
Oh, yeah. I've got my spots, don't you worry, Ali. No, gut issues are not necessarily straightforward. So I think everyone's got individual factors that contribute to the reason why they might experience that symptom. But just as a general kind of guide, so eating too much fibre is a big one.
Yeah.
I find people that are just super healthy, there's just a lot of bulk in their gut. And when they start running and jiggling around, it's just going to come out. Also not allowing enough time between eating and running. So, a lot of people will get up first thing in the morning and, have a coffee and then they're straight out the door running because they just need to get to work and they don't have that time. that's the time often when our bowels are often doing their thing, and we just happen to be out running when it's normally we're at home. So
Yeah.
bit of that as well, I think. Sometimes it could be a hydration concern. So
Okay.
if someone's, poorly hydrated, there might be more risk of that happening. What else?
Caffeine?
Caffeine, possibly. Yeah, some people I think probably are a bit sensitive. The coffee thing, a lot of people notice will help them go to the toilet.
Yeah.
But there are other compounds in coffee outside of caffeine that can stimulate your bowels to be active. So it's not necessarily the caffeine in that situation that's causing the issue. Sometimes people who are chronically underfueling have more problems with gut issues.
Really? Why is that?
It's a really good question. I don't know the full basis for it, but in terms of the latest information we have about low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport, which are conditions that are associated with underfueling,
Yeah.
gut symptoms is a potential sign of those REDs and MEAs. So I have found with some athletes when we've worked on improving that overall energy intake, that the gut symptoms have actually got better.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So yeah, it can be really variable, and there's a whole host of other reasons why as well that can happen. And the best thing I think to do is, if you try some general strategies and you're not getting anywhere, like don't spend forever on trying to figure it out, because you will just get so frustrated, and it's better to work through it with a sports dietitian.
Yeah.
Give you some good guidance.
Yeah, because I can imagine it could, like, we do our sport because it's fun, and trying to troubleshoot it would make it really not fun. Spending ages on it. Like, bring the pros in. What about wees? Like people that, need to go for a wee a lot, like when they're running. What about that? Is it the same kind of thing or different?
Probably different. Nutritionally, I mean, that's more of a hydration thing, I think. Sometimes it's people just getting a bit overzealous with fluid intake.
Okay.
So people just like having a really big volume of fluid within that last couple of hours before running can.
Yeah.
Some people think that's a great thing to do before a race, because they're like, I need to be hydrated. Like,
Yeah.
we've got this fluid, but your body doesn't take long to kind of go, hey, I don't need all this fluid. Let's just pee that out. If it's happening during the running, it's really annoying. It could be a weak pelvic floor for sure.
Yeah.
Potentially. I remember myself after I had my little baby and my first park run, I went out and ran pretty hard, but nowhere near what I was capable of before pregnancy. But got back, and as soon as I crossed the line, I just sat down on the grass and completely wet myself. Had to go find another pair of shorts in my car, and it's embarrassing.
Oh, mum life. But it's not just mum life, right? Like it's, I guess it's a sling of muscles that if they're under strain from, it could be, like a high training volume. It could be a high training volume, including gymming or something like that. If it's under strain, then it, I guess there's going to be a weak area that gets found out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know a lot about how common that issue is in men, but I would suspect there probably are some men that get, similar issues with pelvic floor too.
Yeah, there is. And I think that's something that's kind of quite under-recognised probably with men. Like people think, oh, it's a female issue, but it's not. So, yeah, definitely worth, if you are having that issue, then it can be worth chatting with a physio about. Yeah. Cool. When it comes to nutrition, should we think about it in kind of separate silos like training and racing, or should we look at it as a complete package?
I always think the complete package. Some people when I first started were like, oh, if someone comes to you for race nutrition, like don't worry too much about the training nutrition. But my approach now is, if you haven't made the most out of your training, you're never going to get the result that you could have been capable of in the race.
Yeah.
So, I always really focus on guiding my clients all the way through that process. A lot of those adaptations to training will happen because of dietary factors that
Yeah.
we're eating. We know that adequate nutrition helps you perform better in those training sessions, which is going to push you up to that next level so that you're going to get faster and more capable. So I definitely don't look at it separately. But with your race strategies, there will be things that you will do in the lead up to a race that I don't recommend you do all the time in training. So
Yeah.
examples of that are things like, fueling with really high levels of carbohydrate. It's
Yeah.
not something that is always necessary, but if you're building up for a race, and you're going to be performing at a pretty high intensity for a long time, you really want to make sure that your body's going to be able to cope with the level of fueling that it needs to be able to do that. And so that's where doing some work in some of your training sessions in the lead up to that race with more carbs than usual is important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they do blend a little bit, but yeah, I think definitely you need to look at the whole lot.
And I guess when it comes to that, are there any things that are kind of common themes that people kind of get wrong in their training fueling for? Like, are people getting enough protein post training, or what is it? I'm just
Yeah,
making guesses.
good question. Definitely carbohydrates is the issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I see it in my clients all the time, just not eating enough carbohydrate. And usually what's happening is there's actually too much fat in their diet
Okay.
versus carbs. I very rarely see someone that's underdoing protein, but occasionally it does happen with people that might be on like vegan diets or vegetarian diets, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the research that I'm doing at the moment, we've sort of got 100 runners. They're all masters age recreational distance runners, and the average carbohydrate intake, I think, is somewhere around 3 to 4 grams per kilo body weight, which is really quite low for someone that's doing, maybe 5 to 10 hours a week training.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a common theme, and I think there's many reasons why it happens. A lot of people are a bit fearful of carbohydrate for all the fad diets and things that have happened. But I would say myself, even when I first learned what the requirements are in terms of carbs for sport, I was surprised how much it was too.
Yeah.
So it is quite a bit more than people might think, but it means that, other nutrients like fat, you don't necessarily need to be having quite that huge amount of that some people are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's probably the biggest issue that I see.
More carbs. I'll say yes to more carbs in my life. Another hypothetical situation. If someone was to find themselves at a point in their run where they were vomiting and struggling to keep things down, is their day over, or what should they do?
Oh, it could be. It's a pretty bad point to get to, but yeah, you might come back from it. So, I mean, obviously prevention is the best thing, but once it's happening, you've got to then manage it. So there's a few things you can try. So often slowing down, take a break, try and bring that heart rate down, bring those stress hormones down. That can help settle the gut down a little bit as well. Cool off if you're getting too hot. So getting too hot can potentially exacerbate gut symptoms as well. So stripping off layers or tipping water over your head or just seeking shade, or again, just slowing down can all help with cooling your body. You need to keep hydrating, even if you are vomiting, as hard as it can be. I do encourage people to try and have sips of their fluid, whether that be water or sport drink. Obviously, the sport drink comes with the advantage of the carbohydrates, so at least you're getting some fuel as well. But sometimes, if people are feeling just that bad, the taste of the sport drink is enough to make them keep vomiting as well. So at
Yeah.
least just try and get the water in if you can, little and often. And yeah, with the sport drink, you can even try the rinse and spit method where you're kind of holding it in your mouth at just a small volume for about that 5 to 10 seconds, swish it around. It can activate receptors in your mouth, which send a signal to the reward and pleasure center in your brain, and that can potentially give you pleasurable feelings that may improve performance. It's not really something that's been researched in ultra endurance, but there is evidence in shorter, more high intensity, fasted training that that rinse and spit method with carbohydrate can support better performance versus not doing it in a fasted state. So I figure if you're feeling really bad and vomiting, why not give it a go if that's all you can do?
100%.
But yeah, trying to get back on track with your fueling strategy as well. There's only a certain amount of time that you're going to get away with rinsing and spitting or not fueling at all. And yeah, then it really will be game over because you'll just be so fatigued and it's not going to feel good. So, even if you can get back to 45 grams of carbs an hour, like for a starting point, that's often actually not a bad level for a lot of ultra endurance athletes anyway.
Yeah.
That's a good start. Keep it to simple things. Often just the sport drink is, all people can really tolerate to begin with, and then you might gradually build up some more complex race foods. See the medics. Anti-nausea medication might help you, it might not.
Yeah. I have seen it work treats before, so it's desperate times call for desperate measures, right?
Yeah, definitely.
This is a juicy one. Spring Energy. That must have been a pretty wild time to be a sports dietitian with the scandal that came out of Spring Energy. What learnings should we as a sport have from that?
Yeah, it is interesting, and I think it's still actually kind of in the media a little bit.
Yeah.
I think people need to understand you can't necessarily trust a label.
Yeah.
And I think you need to have an understanding of what are the rules around labelling and how are these products being developed, because it can be confusing and different countries have different regulations, so that's something that can be an issue as well. We would like to think that our products are going to be providing the nutrition that they state they are. It's important because we're relying on that to be able to do the performance that we do. The spring gels were very much under the carbohydrate that they stated on the label. So I think, what was it? I've got it here. It's about 71% less energy and 71% carbs for the apple one, the awesome sauce.
That's such a huge difference.
Yes, it was a lot.
You can't argue with that very easily, can you?
No. The other brands they tested were actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So that was really positive to see, but that spring one particularly was, not wonderful. I think if something doesn't seem to be adding up to what it's stating on the label, I would question it. So if you're taking a sport drink or a gel and it just doesn't seem to be giving you the energy you expect, or it just tastes a bit not like what the label reads, I would be questioning it. I would encourage people to try and use the products that have been tested. There is publicly available information about those different gels that were tested when Spring had the little scandal. And also, not just thinking about the nutritional content of your product, but also what else could be in there.
Yeah.
Has your product been batch tested? Can you be guaranteed, that it's going to be low risk of doping? We can't ever really guarantee that completely, but at least if it's been batch tested, it's gone through some pretty rigorous testing to ensure that it's not got a whole lot of different banned substances that could cause a doping violation. Now, recreational athletes might not worry about that because they think, well, who's going to test me? Theoretically, could happen in some events now. Not really great if you do get caught with the potential, consequences of that. But also I just think for peace of mind, if something's been batch tested, you'd like to think it's probably going to be safer for you to use in terms of potential things that could make you sick that might be in there, that cause harm. I think really think about what you're putting in your body. Don't just blindly read a label and assume that, it is correct. And some labels are really obvious, you'll pick up things and they're just clearly not even filled out the information because they've just made a mistake with that printing system or whatever. But sometimes it's a little bit grayer and you need to I think question and really try and seek those ones that we do have that proper information for.
So thinking about that, should we trust Australia and New Zealand products more? Because I would have thought that, gels coming into New Zealand and Australia, do we not have some kind of food standard where they'll go, oh yeah, this is what it is doing what it says on the label, or what happens there?
Yeah, we do have better food standards labelling laws than some other countries do, and safer sort of production generally. When studies have been done looking at levels of banned substances in sports foods and supplements, Australia and New Zealand are generally pretty good compared to like Europe and the US, for example. So yes, our products probably are safer. And yeah, the food standards Australia and New Zealand. So it's up to the company to put that nutrition information on the packet or label or bottle, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So food standards Australia and New Zealand are not then going and lab testing every single product to
Okay.
confirm that.
Yeah.
So we're really still relying on the producer to give us that accurate information. And I guess if there was something that blew up and people starting to question things, you could go away and get lab testing and find out, like,
Yeah.
does this actually have what it says? That would be at your own expense. Yeah, so, but you'd like to think, yeah, that with Australia and New Zealand, it certainly is a bit safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of following on from doping, so that was one of my questions. How prevalent do you think it is in our sport? Is it intentional or unintentional? Because I mean, yeah.
I've got that information somewhere.
Do you?
If you're happy to just bear with me here, I did talk about this a little while with my athletes.
Because I feel like, people, the intentional amount of doping is probably very low, but unintentional is probably quite high. Like,
Yeah. And I don't know the stats off the top of my head, so I'm just going to go into my group call about that one that I did a while back. Where is it? So, yeah, there's been a little bit of work looking at it. It's not a huge amount. Here we go. So let me find the stats for you, Ellie.
yay.
All right. So UTMB 2017, 412 urine samples were collected from the males and 50% contained at least one drug.
Whoa.
Doesn't mean they were all banned, but 16% contained at least one prohibited drug.
Wow. So that's, 1.5 people out of 10, 1.6 people out of 10. That's actually really high, and knowing that the amount of training and cost that goes into people attending UTMB, it's a pretty major mistake to make.
Yeah. And in terms of like whether that's sort of been intentional or unintentional, I think I've got some stats on that potentially as well. Do I or don't I? Maybe I don't. Some of these drugs people might not even realise that they're banned. So it could just be a regular medication that your doctor's prescribed you that just is not compliant with the WADA code. It's kind of worth checking that out. Yeah.
All right. Heat can be a factor for GI distress, and so is time of day and circadian rhythms. How do athletes prepare for these conditions or situations?
Yeah. Okay. So heat. And so what was the other part? Heat and
Time of day or like kind of circadian rhythms. Like if you're doing it, Tattoo at 100 miler, it's 2 a.m. and your tummy's going sideways.
yeah.
What can you do to kind of prepare for that or, kind of plan for those situations?
Yeah. Okay. So I think really simple thing to think, practice what you're going to be racing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to be racing in the heat, you need to be capable of racing in the heat and practice that in some way. I know you guys are great with your athletes over summer, particularly for Tarawera, like getting them ready with actually going training in the heat so their body can be acclimatized to that. We know that when people do repeatedly expose themselves to that heat exposure in training, there's a whole lot of physiological adaptations that occur that can support them to perform better and feel better when they're exercising in the heat. There is quite a structured method to it, so it's not just about going out, as you please, like occasionally, and you kind of get those benefits. You've got to be a little bit more, planned than that.
Yeah.
So I think, heat adaptation is by far the best thing you can do to manage exercising in the heat. It's not always easy because sometimes you might be training and racing in different environments, so you've got to get a bit creative about how you're going to do it, but you can use passive heat exposure like jumping in a spa or in a sauna after exercise as a way to get some of the benefits. And the benefits are, quite impressive really when you see like the fact that your heart rate can drop lower when you get more heat acclimatized, your body temperature drops, your ability to tolerate exercise in the heat improves, your VO2 max can improve in the heat. Like it's pretty cool stuff just for putting up with being hot for a little bit
Yeah.
when you're training. So that's certainly the biggest thing. But I think the other one with heat is hydration is a big issue. So really having a good grasp of what your hydration requirements might be under those conditions and practicing it. The volumes you might need in a really long, hot race of fluid could be quite a lot more than you might typically drink in training.
Yeah.
And if you're pushing your stomach with that huge volume that it's not used to on race day, it's going to increase your risk for gut problems.
And it is something that people go, oh, do I really need this much? But like I've been in a race where my soft flask is broken. And so you have those things happen as well. So it's good to have a bit extra on you as well, just in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. And knowing where you can get extra along the way too. Like some races you might be able to get water out of streams and things, but some places it won't be safe. So you'll need to take some tablets with you to purify the water and that sort of thing. But yeah, hydration's a really important one. Just making sure you've got the right clothing on. I love your merino wool, but I don't think it's great in the heat.
No.
It just the evaporation is, I think, quite tricky in the heat with that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a really important part of removing heat from your body. So, cool wicking clothes, not that I'm wearing it right now, but yeah, you know what I mean, Ali?
You pretend you are because this is a podcast, so it's okay.
Yeah, I'm on my dry fit outfit right now. And nighttime, yes, you're right. So there is some evidence showing that gut symptoms are more common in the night during the day. I guess it kind of makes sense because we don't really usually eat all through the night as humans.
Yeah.
So practicing it in training, getting out some training runs and giving it a go and seeing how it feels. It might be that you may drop your fueling level down a little bit overnight compared to the day as a way to try and manage it. And sometimes in the night, I think people are moving a bit more slowly anyway.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, could, that lower fueling might support that, okay. But I really do think practice is the main thing with the nighttime fueling.
Because it can be quite a surprise, right? You're getting to that point, you're going, oh, I feel terrible. Like I'm not, I don't feel like eating lollies right now or something like that. So it is good to at least have experienced it, because especially something like Tarawera 100 miler, if they're getting kind of deep into the harder part of the evening or harder section of course, and then you're experiencing something that you haven't experienced before, you're right, it's good to practice for that and kind of mentally prepare as well as physically.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the science on pre-competition carb loading?
Carb loading is one of my most favourite topics to talk about with my clients. It's so fun. They're always like, are you kidding me? Do I really get to eat all of that? It's great.
It's the fun part.
It really is. Yeah. I'm like, let's just pick all the favourite things that you never normally eat and let's put them in this plan.
Yeah.
It's great. So carbohydrate loading, the idea of it is that we're trying to increase muscle glycogen stores in the lead up to a key event. If we do carbohydrate loading well, we can increase our muscle glycogen stores by maybe 150 to 200% of what they normally would be at, which is valuable extra energy that can be available for you during the event. Historically, there's been different ways that it's sort of been done. So, it sort of started off as this quite horrible protocol where you did really hard exercise for 3 or 4 days while you were very much restricting carbohydrate. And then you would ramp up for the next 3 to 4 days with very high carbohydrate intake while doing less exercise. And there was a really big supercompensation of muscle glycogen by doing that. But as you can imagine, people felt pretty awful at that first part of the week where they were training hard and not getting much fuel.
Yeah.
It's evolved since then. So there's now been a sort of more gradual increase in carbs while we're gradually reduce the physical activity. So you're not having to do that really hard training with the low carbs, but you're gradually tapering your training and you're gradually upping the carbs over about, I don't know, anything from 3 to 6 days. That's also very useful and a bit more practical, obviously, because it's less tiring, but it's still not necessarily easy. So what I actually usually use with my athletes now is more of a rapid carb loading protocol. So that would be done over 36 to 48 hours prior to an event, which means it's a lot less time for you to have to worry about being, quite strategic about the fuel choices and things that you use. Believe it or not, carb loading can not be that much fun after a while. So some people are quite happy to just keep it small.
Yeah.
During that time, you'll be very much, not doing a lot of exercise at all, if anything. You're looking at about 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo body weight in that phase, which is quite a lot. A lot of people don't know how to achieve that practically. I think that's one of the barriers, but most people don't even really fully appreciate really what carbohydrate loading involves at all. And I've never met an athlete before who's come to me and told me what they're doing and, got it really to the level it needs to be.
Wow.
Yeah. But it certainly can help with performance. So, you're looking at about a 2% improvement overall in performance. And that's really just because you're able to maintain the optimal pace for longer, and particularly so in that final stage. So, possibly 20% improvement in the final stages of the prolonged run. So those people that do say, like, I've, carb loaded and I'm feeling really strong at the finish, that could certainly be a reflection of having done a good job with the carb loading. It does make you store more water. So that's just due to holding extra water alongside the glycogen in muscles. I've got a lot of athletes that find that really challenging, and, they're like, I don't want to put on weight. Like, I can't do that. It might not be good for my performance, but also, like, what if it just doesn't go away? So there's a bit of nurturing sometimes around that, and, perhaps you're not going to actually check your weight around that time if it's really going to bother you.
Yeah.
But also encouraging people that it's performance fueling. It is not healthy eating. You are going to burn through all of it, if not a bit more, in your event, and more likely than not, you're going to come out exactly the same as what you were, usually.
What are some easy kind of ways to up your carb loading in those days beforehand?
Various strategies. It's really about thinking, how can I keep stuff flowing through my gut as easily as possible? So fibre being reduced.
Yeah.
Not too much fat. Fat slows down stomach emptying, so it's going to make you feel more full, which is harder than to be able to eat enough. Protein also is can suppress appetite, so you don't want to be overloading on protein. I very often use high carbohydrate fluids with my athletes to help them to get the extra carbohydrate in, just because it does move through the gut really quickly and you don't really get that sensation of fullness from it.
Yeah.
And that can use things like sports drinks or soft drinks or cordial, or sometimes just maltodextrin powder added to water can work as well. And then, with meals, just keeping it, pretty simple really. So white breads and cereals are your friend. Not too much veggies, not too much fruit, really, avoiding the skins and the seeds and the roughage that are going to be more bulky and make you feel more full. And I think also just making sure you plan it. So many people I will talk to, and like, even when we've talked about a carb loading plan, they've then gone and travelled somewhere and they haven't got organised, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, all I've got is this restaurant, and like everything is like burgers and chips. Like, this isn't what we had on the plan.
No. And it's you can understand how it happens, but it's, I mean, I've done it before a big race and been like, why did I eat that the night before a race? And you kind of just, I don't know, I guess you get caught up in the busyness of going and registering or getting to your accommodation and all that sort of stuff, but it can definitely derail a race.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh, I've done it too. Some of the stuff I've eaten before, I'm like, well, what did I do that for? And I paid for it the next day.
Yeah. Is to that curry house in Napier. What are common mistakes that you see runners make?
I guess kind of covered a fair bit of it really
Yeah, I
through
was
other
thinking
things
that.
we've chatted through, but definitely the underfueling, where people are, mostly it's a carbohydrate related issue that's causing it. And it's tricky for some people to get their head around because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're like losing weight and, becoming that tiny little person. Your body can sort of tolerate underfueling to a level, but at a point it's going to start to have to compensate in some way for the lack of energy coming in. And usually it'll do that by changing how your body is going to function. So we see that, metabolism can not be working at its full rate. We can see that, your body's no longer able to produce adequate hormones. It's not able to support a good immune system, so you're more likely to get sick and injured. There's a whole lot of issues that can come from underfueling, and that's doesn't necessarily come with weight loss all the time. So, if you're finding that you are chronically underfueling and that metabolism is going down, it means the weight isn't necessarily then going to change. But people will push back on that and say, but I'm not losing weight, so like, how am I underfueling? Like, you want me to increase calories? Like, that's just going to make me put weight on. But I always encourage people, it's about stoking the furnace. If you're underfueling, you're kind of burning away on a cinder, and you're not at that really nice level where everything is like on full power.
Yeah.
But if we can put the fuel in and boost all of that up, like, you're going to recover better from sessions, you're going to be able to push harder in sessions, you're going to be much more resilient. But that's a very common one. Not planning their nutrition, so not just in terms of carb loading, but also like racing. The classic like person that rings you 2 days before race day and says like, I need a race plan.
Oh, golly.
Someone did it to me this year with yoga, and I was like, it's a bit late. I can't actually even see you because I don't have any availability over the weekend.
Oh,
Like, it's also like, well, you've got no time to practice anything, so just keep doing
no.
what you're doing and talk to me for the next race.
Yeah. Give me some time. We see the same with training, Erin, don't worry.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I feel like nutrition, though, kind of does get a bit more of a backseat than training. Like, I think a lot of people get that you probably should train for some of these events.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like sometimes nutrition is a bit of an afterthought.
It's the thing that people go, oh man, that was really difficult for me. Like everything else felt great. I need to get on top of my fueling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you probably get the call afterwards, like, help.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think probably the other one is just people relying a lot on commercial sports foods and supplements instead of just eating proper food.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting with my research, like looking at the diet data we've got, just how much of that stuff is in there. It's making up 50% of some people's energy intake for the day, and
Wow.
it's not real food. It's not giving you everything that food can with all the, various vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and fibres and healthy fats that we need. And it's really distracting for a lot of people because it does make them think that, they're going to get special benefits by consuming some of these products that are marketed in that way. And so they're not actually just following good sports nutrition principles around healthy eating and fueling, when you need to.
On that note, are there any magic products like that I should know about?
Oh, look, there are some that I often will suggest to clients for various reasons, like chocolate milk. It's not really a sports food, is it? But it's a classic one for recovery. It's just got the perfect combination of everything with carbs and fluid and electrolytes, and it's easy to get down and it's delicious. But yeah, like there'll be some things I'll use like protein powders potentially, have relevance at times.
Yeah.
Protein bars maybe. Sports drinks and gels absolutely have a role where they can be really helpful because you're not going to eat the 5 food groups when you're running 100 Ks or
No.
whatever race you're doing. It's just not practical. So, I guess in that way, yes. And I guess the other big one is caffeine. Heaps of good evidence for being able to support performance and there's not many runners that I find who don't get some benefit from it. Usually most people find it really helpful.
Yeah. Salt, is it the magic cure for cramps?
Salt. Okay. It's an interesting area of sport nutrition because unlike carbohydrate needs, we don't actually have anywhere near as much information about our sodium needs. So sodium is the electrolyte or mineral that we find in salt that has a role in regulating blood pressure. It helps to maintain a stable blood sodium level, which is really important with fluid balance. We do need sodium. In terms of cramps, there really isn't any evidence at this stage that sodium does help with cramps, as much as people sort of often claim that it might. So some of the studies that have looked at people that have used sodium supplements have found that with ultramarathoners who had a cramp versus those that didn't, the sodium supplementation was not different across those two groups. So that's suggesting that sodium possibly didn't have a role in why they got cramps or didn't get cramps. We're really doing need a bit more research on that topic. But cramps, I think, a bit like the gut issues, it is thought that probably it's more of an individual sort of issue where there's various factors that will contribute to someone having a cramp, and everyone's kind of got a bit of a threshold at which these factors will build up, and then if they get to that threshold, bang, they get a cramp. Where that threshold sits for different people probably is variable, but some things that, I guess to be aware of that could help you not get closer to that threshold be things like being well trained. So your body's able to cope with the demands of what you're putting it through. So that's really targeting fatigue, which is thought to be a really major contributor potentially to cramps. So if you're well trained, you're going to cope better from a fatigue point of view. Being well hydrated and well fueled will also help with fatigue, obviously, too. Training at race pace.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't do enough of that and then wonder why they go out really hard on race day and everything falls apart. Sometimes it can be supplements. I've done it where I took a huge dose of caffeine in combination with some L-citrulline, which is another supplement that's not commonly found in products. But I also was returning from a break after an injury to my first race, and it was a downhill start, and I was super edgy. I had the caffeine, making it worse. I probably wasn't well trained enough. Downhill running, so really hard eccentric loading on those muscles, and I ended up with bilateral quad cramps. And I could barely walk myself back to the start line, and I lay with the medics for, it must have been like 40 minutes, and they couldn't get my legs to settle down. I had massive DOMs for about a week afterwards.
Oh,
It's a really bad one.
ow, that sounds painful.
So, trying to keep that nervous system, settled, I think is
Yeah.
important as well. And sometimes supplements can contribute to that not being settled enough. Managing stress. Interestingly, sleep possibly might have a role in people that develop cramps as well. So if you're not getting enough of that. There's a really good paper actually that's got a little checklist that I use when I talk to my athletes about cramp that we go through and sort of try and explore what might be factors that contribute to cramps for them. And then that helps us to sort of come up with some ideas about what are we going to do to try and manage it.
It's tough, hey? I always feel for people that get cramps. Your one sounds exceptionally painful. I remember one of my most hilarious finish line moments was at UTA, and this guy, well, actually I saw the spectators' faces, and they were all kind of like, at the fairground, how you get those clowns with their mouths open that you're supposed to throw balls in. They were looking like that, downwards, and I was thinking, what's going on? And so I looked down, and there's this man who's like kind of reaching down, and his calf is like inverted, like it looked like something from Alien. And I get nervous laughter. So I'm looking at him and I just start laughing hysterically because I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so bad. And then he shouts at me, don't just stand there, do something. And I was like, But that poor guy, like he sounded a bit like you. Like he was he just like timbered, like just one straight move, flat down onto the ground, and was just like holding his leg, and it was just going.
no.
Yeah.
What
So
did you do, Ali? Did you help him?
I just kept laughing because I was so surprised. I think I was just working. But people were trying to kind of move his leg. But like in hindsight, really, like I probably should have used something to stop that signal, right? Like some pickle juice or some sharp tasting kind of thing to break that signal that he was getting. But the beauty of hindsight, I didn't really have a jar of pickle juice handy either.
Oh, yeah. That is one that can maybe help. I think the biggest one is just stretching it out. Yeah, but it's not necessarily easy when you're doubled over in pain on the ground.
No, and it was so tight. Like, oh, that poor guy. Yeah, no, I just sorry to whoever he is. He's probably still remembering my face, going, "That mean lady didn't help me." Can you talk us through hydration? Like, how much should we be drinking and what?
Yep. It's a really important area as well as the fueling aspect, and probably one that, gets less attention than fueling from a lot of people. It's, again, just something that we kind of think, I need to drink, but that's what I need to worry about, just drink something.
Yeah.
So it's super important. Our body has a bit of a tolerance of how much dehydration or overhydration it will put up with before it starts to get a bit grumpy and rebel on us. In terms of, why that hydration is important, it's going to help you to maintain blood volume. That's really important for then making sure that your heart isn't having to work too hard to push the blood around. That can increase your effort level. It can increase your use of fuel basically make exercise just feel harder. We need it to regulate our body temperature as well. And it's also going to deliver nutrients and oxygen to the muscles also. So it is really important. The sweet spot really in terms of hydration is typically losing less than 2% of body weight in an event. That weight loss is usually going to be mostly fluid related, depending on how long the event is. Anything up to about 3 hours, that 2% guide is pretty reasonable to use. There are some studies that have looked at longer duration events like 100 milers and things like that. And, people are coming back maybe 4 to 5% body weight loss, but still clinically on a blood test looking like they're actually quite well hydrated. And that's probably just reflecting that they've actually used a lot of fuel as well as fluid. Some of the race winners or fastest runners of Western States have been, having those sort of levels of weight loss. So that 2% guide, take with a bit of caution. I've even heard some people say maybe 1% might be enough to impact performance for some athletes. So, but it's a good sort of starting guide, and you've got to also think about other indicators of hydration like thirst. Gut issues can be related to hydration problems. If you're feeling like you're running a lot harder than you really should be for the pace, that can be a sign of a hydration problem as well. So you do need to kind of put a bit of it together along with that percent body weight loss. In terms of overhydration, not great either.
No.
More so in ultras, unfortunately, where I think, your sweat rate's going to be lower. You're also got much more access to fluid because you're running with your backpack and all the bottles and bladders and stuff there. It's easier to drink. It is more of a common problem there. And, when you get those athletes that are really like, I've got to drink my flask every hour, for example, they're the ones that are probably most at risk, where they're not really factoring in at all, what is the conditions that I'm running in, because that will impact how much you sweat. If it's hot or windy or humid or cold, or it's all going to change how much you sweat. If you're running faster or slower, it's all going to change it as well. So, just going and saying I need to drink a flask an hour every hour for my run, potentially could be quite dangerous if you've got a cooler race and you're not moving that quickly. So some of those issues with overhydration, you get a bit of crossover with the dehydration, so possibly gut issues might be related to that. But also things like fatigue, and sometimes you can get the confusion and irritability and the brain complications, which can be a sign of fluid swelling happening on the brain, which is pretty dangerous. There are some reports of people dying from doing that in endurance sport. Thankfully, not. It's pretty rare, but it can happen. But I think a lot of people, they might have some mild symptoms, but never actually go and get checked.
Yeah.
And the only way to know is getting a blood test. Generally, people won't get that unless they're pretty unwell.
Yeah, that's right.
So, there was a study that was done, I think it was the Great North Walk. It was 100,
Yeah.
it's 100 miles.
Yeah, there is 101 there. Yeah.
Yeah, and they tested some athletes the day after the race, and 30% had low blood sodium.
Okay.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So some of those probably did have some milder symptoms, but, you would think maybe they just attributed that to, hey, I'm running 100 miles. Like, of course I feel a bit off.
Yeah.
But that's possibly going to muck up performance. So maybe if they avoided that, they might have performed better. So something just to be very aware of. I think often drink to thirst is an appropriate strategy for a lot of ultra runners, but not necessarily always.
Yeah.
Some athletes just can't get themselves in the habit of actually drinking when their body's is giving them those messages. Sometimes it's like, my bladder hose is annoying and I just can't be bothered getting it, so I'm just not going to drink. Some people's thirst mechanism might not be great. So as we get older, sometimes that thirst mechanism doesn't quite work as well as it used to, and you might not realise that you actually need to drink. If you are going to use a structured plan, I think it's really important to know your sweat rate. There's actually a really cool tool that's come out. You might know of it, the sweat rate calculator. Have you come across it yet, Ali?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wish I could show you the people that are listening my screen right now. It's only been around for a few months. It was developed by some Australians, I think.
Okay.
Essentially, they've gone and had a look at a whole bunch of research on sweat rate and hydration, etc., to come up with some algorithms to try and predict sweat losses in sport. So you can go in there and plug in your details. At the moment, it only works for running and cycling.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to add other sports down the track. You can say whether you're indoors or outdoors. You can put in your weight, your height, the weather conditions, including, if it's overcast or, sunny, or if it's windy or not, etc. And then put in sort of your pace or how far you're intending to run over what period of time. And then it will give you an estimated prediction of your sweat rate.
Wow.
I found it to be pretty accurate from my experience so far. I do think probably it's more accurate for a flat course as compared to trail running, so that's something to bear in mind. I have, with one of my athletes, used a grade adjusted pace instead of his actual pace to try and get the data. I do think it's a good starting point. Like, you've never done a sweat rate assessment before, just to see, like, what might I lose in my race, hypothetically, and then give you an idea of what you might need to practice to drink during your goal race. But then go away and do the formal sweat rate assessment to see your fluid losses, and that is essentially weighing yourself before and after training. Factoring in anything you've drunk during the session, if you've had to do a wee or a poo, factoring that in as well. Anything you've eaten during the session, you need to factor in. So there's a few things you need to think about outside of just checking your weight before and after running, but it is a really helpful thing to do. And you can build a good bank of data that can give you your sweat rate across a whole lot of different types of conditions that you can then go back to again and again and again down the track. If you've got a race coming up and you check the weather forecast and it says it's going to be 25 degrees and sunny, you can go back to your sweat rate data and go, when did I do a run that was like that, and find out what was my sweat loss, and then from there work out, okay, that was my sweat rate per hour, what might my total sweat loss be for that race. Okay, now I need to factor in that I don't need to replace everything, so I just need to get back to at least 2% weight loss. So just making a little bit of adjustment there to work out your hourly fluid intake. And then from there, with that sort of structured plan, still being cluey about signs of hydration while you're doing the event. So it might end up being that the weather changes
Yeah. So keep checking in with yourself. Don't just make it a fixed kind of a rule. Go like, how am I feeling?
Yeah.
What are the conditions? Does this still make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Yeah. It can be a bit dodgy. I had a client that came to me and he'd done Hawaii Ironman, and he'd done a sweat rate test and saw that he was losing 1,000 mils an hour. I just assumed that was what he needed to then drink every hour for the Ironman, and he didn't end up well. He ended up in hospital from too much fluid.
Yeah.
Put on a whole lot of weight, and
Oh, crikey. So it's pretty. That can be quite dangerous, right? If you're not sense checking or kind of keeping tabs on that thirst sensation. What should a race morning look like in terms of fueling and hydration?
Very individual, depending on the
Yeah.
person. Also depending on the race as well. So how early is your race starting is something you've got to think about. Some races start at 2 a.m. Tarawera.
Oh, golly, yeah.
It's pretty hard, so you're probably not going to get up, and have a massive meal and then stay awake for a few hours and digest it and then go and run. So, that would be an example where you're really trying to make the most of the carb loading the day prior and waking up, reasonably close to when you start and just having something small just to top the tank up a little bit at that last minute. Whereas other races, you have more time, and, some races don't start till 10 a.m. So then you've actually potentially woken up at 5 or 6 in the morning just because that might be when you normally wake, and you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 little meals in between, waking and starting the run. So that's an important factor to think about. You definitely want to make sure what you're having is something that you like, that you've practiced before, it sort of worked for you in the past. It's got to be familiar. I think there's something really comforting about having those favourite things. When I went to Tarawera, I took my own bread.
Did you?
I took my own jam in little pots because I was so neurotic.
Whatever works. I think you have more of an excuse too, since you're a sports dietitian. It's a much easier way to get away with that.
It's a bit weird. You've got white bread and jam over there too.
We do. Yeah.
Familiarity is really good. Just in terms of the nutrients, so obviously carbohydrate is your really important fuel source there. So overnight, we do use glycogen from our liver to maintain our brain function overnight, and just baseline organ function. And so it means that when you wake, your muscle glycogen stores should still be pretty full, but your liver glycogen will be a little bit depleted, and topping up with some carbohydrate can then help to bring that liver glycogen up a bit. So then you've overall got a really nice full tank of carbs. But also, having that carbohydrate, I think, it is a bit of a brain food as well. Like, it wakes you up a bit and can get you sort of thinking and be sharp and on the ball. Something really practical, quick, particularly if you don't have a lot of time. If you're traveling, don't go and try and have your fancy breakfast, accept that you might just be eating a cold bagel with a bit of jam from the little packet that you got from the hotel cafeteria. It's not going to be gourmet, but it gives you what you need at that time. With the carb loading, similar, keep the fibre down, keep the fat down, keep the protein down, so you're not overly full and uncomfortable. But then in saying that, some people can actually eat quite incredible things and go and run, and they get away with it. So we've all got a little bit of individual tolerance, I think. And if someone says I can eat, 10 Weet-Bix and go and run the next hour and be fine, okay, that's cool.
Works for you.
Don't forget your fluid. So you do need some hydration. Don't go overboard. So, that last 2 hours is really where you don't want to be having anything beyond really big sips of fluid, or little sips of fluid, just so you're letting your body kind of figure it out and work out, okay, I've had enough water, I can pee that excess out well and truly before I get to the start line or during the event.
Oh, golly, there's been a lot of this. I really appreciate it, Erin. It's been, hopefully people find it helpful and informative and gives them some ideas about what's important from a fueling perspective and how to do it a bit better.
Yeah.
Everybody that comes on Dirt Church Radio gets to the joy of sharing their greatest run ever. So Erin Colebatch, what is your greatest run ever?
Oh, I did think about this a little bit, but it's pretty easy. It's Tarawera. So I'm sure you're going to love that. It was a great event. I'd never done, and I'd never been to New Zealand, so I think that was a big part of it. I, just got to see a whole new place. So it was a really good adventure, and got to go over there with a whole bunch of people from SA and have that adventure with all of them, which was just awesome. It was a year of the mud and the rain, and oh my God, it was.
Sorry about it. But you still loved it.
I did. I think because I was just so invested in the race, nothing was going to stop me. I was just like, nah, I've trained, I've done more than I needed to in training. I'm feeling really good, I'm set for this. And, the mud, I was just like, whatever, I'm going mud, you're not going to stop me. So, I just made fun of it. I remember jumping in the mud and splashing it everywhere and this is just the only way I'm going to get through. Is be a bit comical about it all. It's a beautiful place to run. It was so well organised. Country that I'd never seen before. That I don't know what that waterfall is that you go past.
Tarawera Falls.
Yeah, that it was so beautiful, and I was just like, oh, I wish I wasn't pushing myself so hard because I could stop and take a photo of this. I just need to capture it in my brain.
Is it still there?
Yes, it is still there. It is.
Good.
It's become this mythical, cloud enshrouded, amazing memory.
They are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And normally the photographer would be kind of sitting near there to capture you running past it, but I don't know if they were that year.
I don't think I got a photo there that I remember. I had a good run there as well. So I was, feeling pretty strong, and that was obviously enjoyable. Still feeling pretty good at the end, where I could kind of do a mini kind of sprint towards the end.
Yay!
So that was nice. And then just the holiday around it. I went to the Springs the day after and just did nothing with all of us there, just chatting and just reflecting on how good the race was. And it was really cool. Really, really
that's so neat. I'm glad that's your greatest run ever. And I'm glad that you embraced the mud. You made it sound really fun.
It was fun. It was hard. And I ended up with my sneakers were cutting into the back of my heels. Ooh. And they ended up with this, sort of a bit of a gouge there. And anyway, I started getting really hot, nasty feet. And I looked at my foot at one point in the holiday, and I'd managed to get an infection and had to go and get into one of your GPs, which is finding hen's teeth apparently.
It is, yeah.
Got put on antibiotics afterwards. So that was just the mud that got ground into it. But
little souvenir to take home. Oh, funny. Oh, it's been great chatting, Erin. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone else that's listening has had a good time too.
Thanks for having me, Ellie. It's been great to catch up, and thanks to everyone who listens in from here.
You guys killed it.
Oh, thanks.
It's going to be so interesting, isn't it? Seeing what happens and obviously we've got some imminency bias, I guess, but thinking about Tarawera is and what I'm going to be putting in my body, thinking about it a lot. Real food versus space food, the mix of electrolytes, all of that stuff, super important. And
carb loading.
Yeah.
Get the carbs in, Matt.
Get the carbs in. Well, that's never usually an issue.
Good.
But carb loading, that's another thing, isn't it? Carb loading is something that, remember when we grew up, we had the food pyramid? And they're like, hey, have you had your 10 slices of bread today on your pasta? Because that's at the bottom of the food pyramid. And it feels like at certain times it's swapped over. But I guess it's the thing, isn't it? Simple things work. And although it is a simple process, it's by no means easy. But look, thank you. And I'm super excited. A couple of weeks we get to hang out. Andrew will be down there as well. So the whole crew is going to be down at Tarawera. He's going to be pacing someone. So that's going to be fantastic. I feel like it's going to be like a race between, and this is again by no means to both Harsh and I are punching above our weight in terms of paces. I think you comfortably say that. You know what I mean? We haven't gone with a peer in terms of running ability. We've gone with a much superior runner. So it feels like there's going to be this kind of battle where these two very capable but very citizen athletes are going to be absolutely kind of pushed along to destruction by super competitive, very accomplished runners. And I wonder if that's a throwdown in the making. But I'm here for it, I guess.
I'll bring some popcorn for the finish line, okay?
Absolutely. Again, it's that whole thing, isn't it? It's like the tiger and the pig thing. The tiger adopts the piglet on YouTube and carries it around its mouth. Maybe it's going to be that situation. But look, I'm rambling. Thank you, Ali, so much. And thank you very much for tuning in. Dirt Church Radio is presented by me, Matt Raymond.
Ali Pottinger.
And Andrew McDowell. We're on all the podcast platforms, so like, follow, and give us a rating. It really helps.
We're on social media at Dirt Church Radio. Email at dirtchurchradio@gmail.com.
Now, don't forget to sign up for the Substack for the weekly newsletter and the Aid Station podcast.
And don't forget to write in with your greatest run ever. We'd love to hear from you, and you can read them on the website as well.
Thanks to our supporters, Further Faster, That's It, Squadrun, and our Substack subscribers and the DCR Aid Station crew.
Stay tuned for our show in 2 weeks when we have another great guest lined up.
Mā te wā.